I mean, the word has been in use for nearly 1500 years, so obviously it has picked up a set of meanings along the way. When people say Islam, they refer to a civilization which began 1400 years ago. Peoples came and embraced Islam, and they have elements of Islamic culture. There you go, a set of peoples. First it began with the Arabs, then with the Persians, the Turks, the Indians, and the Malays, and a whole diverse set of people came to identify with this term Islam. Islam is also a culture. There is such a thing as Muslim food. If you go to halalco.co.uk, there is actually a book called Muslim food, whatever that means. It's probably just halal food, but actually no, it's also Arab, Indian, Turkish type foods. And obviously the thing which started it all, Islam as a religion. And this is what we're actually focusing on in this talk. Islam is a religion, and that religion has already been developed over the course of 1400 years. And ultimately, Islam is a world in itself. You know, when you say an Islamic homeland, you're not going to think about South America. When you talk about an Islamic agenda, it will not be the agenda of the Japanese. So you can see that the word Islam in itself has already been loaded. It is a word in use, and we need to understand how that use is performed in order for us to make full use of it. What do you picture when I say Islam? Can anyone guess what's going to be on? Because I'm just going to load a few pictures. A few pictures are going to emerge.
Is it going to be a flag?
There are no flags. No, there are no flags.
The Qur'an.
Well, no,
the Kaaba.
No, the Qur'an is not the
Mecca.
first one.
Mecca.
The first one is, there you go, I mean, these guys, they are performing the prayers. It's quite easy to recognize as well. If you read any book, in any introduction to Islam, you will see that the 5 pillars of Islam are what is commonly known as Islam, right? And these people are praying in Mecca. So there you have it, set pictures in your mind. When you say Islam, there are set pictures there. This is probably when you read a British newspaper and they talk about Muslims. Generally you'll see one of these, a hijabi. So this is the case because we are dealing with a set of overt signals to tell you what Islam really is. And obviously, last but not least, one of these guys. Now, one of these guys, you will see that that kind of framing is necessary in order to show the Muslim as an other. The Muslim is seen to be almost like the barbarian at the gate kind of thing. So, when we use the word Islam, we think of the world in Islam. There is a great diversity in this world, but there are already pictures associated with this idea. There are many Islams. The first one is Sunni Islam, which is the majority, and it is called Sunni Islam because it's based on Qur'an and Sunnah. It has been decided upon or articulated by a set of scholars, and there are vast differences between the schools of law. I mean, we're told that there are only minute differences. This is actually not true. The differences actually go back to the roots of the law itself. Some of the schools believe in ijma or qiyas, which is consensus or analogy. Other schools don't. Some schools define ijma differently from other schools, etc., etc. So Sunni Islam is also a world within the world of Islam. Next we have Shia Islam, which is based on the Quran and the Prophet's family. So it's a whole other source of authority. And naturally a whole other set of scholars. And even among the Shias, there are disputes. And the disputes largely are in who should be the next Imam. Because the Shias have 12 Imams. And some of them disagree on who should be the 5th Imam, or the Zaydis. Some disagree about the 7th Imam, which are the Ismailis, etc. So we can see that Islam is not a uniform thing. Now this is indeed very strange. For anyone who goes to who wants to learn about Islam, you will be painted a picture as if Islam is one thing. And that one thing is inevitably the conservative traditionalist Islam. rarely, I mean, very rarely will you find the Shia to be what that person is looking for, or perhaps even other minorities. But even more rare is the fact that that person will be looking for Qur'anist Islam. Islam is a vast set of ideas. So now we come to Qur'anist Islam. What is Qur'anist Islam? First and foremost, it is a type of Islam. This is one thing which we had previously been accused of, and we've been said that, okay, you're creating a new religion. This is actually not true. Qur'anist Islam is an Islam. It is based on the same cultural religious rooting of Islam, which is the Prophet Muhammad bringing the Qur'an. The only difference is we disagree about how we go about interpreting that phenomenon. So there are many Islams, and all of them point towards Allah. So we have no problem with that. As Yasin said, we will not tolerate people using the term sectarians or hadithas or kafirs. Not because we're being apologists, but because the Quran genuinely does not stop us from being diverse. We have absolutely no problem in being diverse. And Qur'anist Islam is a path among paths. So we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. We are endeavoring towards discovering the answers, and inshallah we will be able to apply whatever we know so that we can benefit our lives. That's the end point. The end point is not to write an 8-volume encyclopedia called the Tafsir of Farouk. That would do the Ummah a disservice rather than a service. So why is there a need for Qur'anist Islam? The other Islams are traditionalists. While we acknowledge that Sunni Islam and Shia Islam are Islams, they are based upon the premise that Islam must be based on the Quran and another source of authority. For the Sunnis, it's Hadith and the ulama. For the Shia, it's their own Hadith as well as the Imams. Traditionalism isn't necessarily un-Islamic unless it contradicts the Quran. And I think this is where we need to totally leave behind this absolutist mindset. When people say, well, it's not Islamic for you to follow Hadith and Sunnah, this is not necessarily the case. Now, if the Hadith commands something which explicitly goes against the Quran, then yes, I would agree with that. But if the Hadith were to command charity, it were to command kindness to one's parents, it were to command doing general good for people, for us to say that this Hadith is false is without any kind of basis. The Hadith may be at best a conjecture, but it does have the truth value in it. In fact, we can only, obviously, we know this through the Quran. So what is the problem really? If we say there's no problem with traditionalists following Hadith, what is the problem? The problem lies in giving traditionalism the divine authority which the Sunnis and Shias have given it. That is what Quranists disagree with. Now, what does this mean exactly? Well, let's assume that we have a Hadith which enjoins some kind of good. So, if a member of the Ahlul Sunnah believe in it, he could possibly say, well, unless you believe in it, you're not a Muslim. Quranists would reject this. Quranists do not believe that any Hadith is obligatory on anyone. Hadith can be a source of wisdom, but it has no support for us to accept it as coming from the Prophet. It could be a grain of cultural wisdom which has been passed down. We have absolutely no problem with that. So what does the existence of Qur'anist Islam imply? Acceptance. So we call ourselves Qur'anists because we accept that there are other approaches to Islam. We do not say we are Qur'anists and therefore no one else is a Muslim. No. We are Qur'anists because there are traditionalists. Celebration. We celebrate the diversity within and the diversity outside. And we try to learn from them. We acknowledge that religion is a process. It is not just simply saying, okay, well, I have the Quran now, I'm saved. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to actually read it, keep mining it for information, and keep learning from it. Personal responsibility. Now, this is something which is not coming out for the first time. Actually, in early Islam, with the Mu'tazila, the rationalists of Islam, they actually believed that all acts were based on free will. And this gave human beings personal responsibility over every action which they did. Unfortunately, Islam was overtaken by the doctrine of fatalism, where we believe that it is God who authored all our actions, and therefore we are fated to be either believers or non-believers. This is not what the Quran teaches. So Quranists advocate personal responsibility. We have no clergy to answer to. So therefore, we don't follow the views of a person simply because we invest him with authority. Rather, we believe in him if his view coincides with our understanding of the Quran. The Quran is space. So I have to ask you, what is a space? A space is a demarcated location where certain things take place. So a certain protocol is observed. I mean, for example, you won't go to Whitehall dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. You won't go to the masjid expecting to have alcohol, for example. So these are all protocols which you observe in certain spaces. In most traditionalist spaces, what can you expect? Let's assume you go to a talk and the alim says something to you which you disagree with. What's going to happen then? So you have an imam-client relationship. There's no questioning, there's no reasoning. You might actually be chased out for asking a cheeky question. In the Quranist space, what can you expect? Well, I have to say, what can you expect? I'm emphasizing the word can. Because past experience has shown that we have not actually been up to that standard, but this is what we aspire to anyway. A flat hierarchy. So there are no authorities, flat. So in other words, we are all note sharers. I share my notes with you. You may say, you know what, I don't agree with you. That's fine. We can live with that. A non-judgmental area to think and expound. So you can go there and you say, well, do you know what? I think jinn actually means this. The other Quranists are not allowed to say, well, that just expels you from our circle. No, we do not advocate such views. Every Quranist is responsible for himself. So whatever you believe is between you and God. It has absolutely nothing to do with me. The best I can do is just share with you and say, well, I disagree, and here is why I disagree. That's absolutely fine. Is there only one type of Quranism? And I think we all know that the answer to that is absolutely not. There is not only one type of Quranism. There are actually many types of Quranism, and there are more types of Quranists than there are types of Sunnis and Shia combined. So assuming there are 4 madhabs of the Sunnis, and the Shia have basically 3 or 4 main types. There are actually more types of Quranists combined than those 2. Is this a good thing? Well, I think it is a good thing if we can respect each other and learn from each other. And we acknowledge the right of each other to interpret the Quran for ourselves. The Quran is typology. I've actually been working on this because I've observed that Quranists tend to think along set lines. And sometimes there isn't even a formula where you can determine how a Quranist thinks. I'm slowly working on this. This is a very rudimentary sketch of the types of Quranists. The first type is a traditionalist Quranist. Now this does not mean that the Quranist follows Hadith, but rather the acts of worship or piety which is in line with traditionalist Islam. This is perhaps the most common form of Quranism. And the followers of Tolu Islam and the IIPC, they tend to follow this path. There is a neo-traditionalist Quranist. So these are Quranists who also accept traditional acts of worship, but they seek to modify it. For example, they don't believe that Hajj should take place on one day. They believe Hajj should take place in 4 months. They don't believe that fasting should end at Maghrib, but rather should end at Isha. They don't believe that the salah is 5 times a day, but perhaps 3 times a day or twice a day. So these are neo-traditionalists. The philosophical Quranists. There are Quranists who use the Quran to answer philosophical questions, and by that I mean in a very academic way. If you read the writings of Qasim Ahmad in his book Hadith Revaluation, he actually follows this path where he talks about the Quran as an answer to man's philosophical needs. Ghulam Ahmad Rabais also did so in his book Islam, A Challenge to Religion. Biblical Quranism. These are Quranists who use the Bible to substantiate certain Quranic stories, because the Quran and the Bible share a number of similar personalities. Constitutional Quranists. These are Quranists who seek to use the Quran as a state constitution. This was actually pushed forward in the Pakistan project about 60 years ago, unfortunately without success. But indeed, we have seen how the Quran can be used for that purpose. Logocentric Quranism. These are Quranists who focus on the differences in words. For example, the differences between the words Al-Kitab and Al-Qur'an. Scholars like Dr. Muhammad Shahrur from Syria pioneered this approach. Evangelical Quranists. These are Quranists who focus on the ecstatic experiences which the Quran provides. I mean, these tend to be people who were formerly from evangelical churches and who are used to these kind of emotive religious experiences. Secular Quranists. These are Quranists who totally reject any kind of religious concepts within the Quran. So they don't believe the Quran enjoins any kind of worship, but rather a more secular-like life. In fact, they seek to minimize religion in their lives. Scientistic Quranism. These are Quranists who use science and mathematics to substantiate their worldview. Personality-centric Quranists. So there have been personalities who have given their interpretations of the Quran while rejecting Hadith and Sunnah, and they have their own personal, they have their own followers. Scriptural-centric Quranism. These are Quranists who focus on the scriptural concepts within the Quran, and the Quran has many of those concepts, such as Al-Kitab, Al-Quran, Hadith, Qawl, Kalima, and many other terms. So these terms are used and articulated to form a kind of an information system with the Quran. Ethicists Quranists. These are Quranists who focus on ethical concepts on a very personal dimension, so that they can practice them in their lives, such as taqwa, ihsan, sabr, and there are many more which the Quran teaches. Archaeological Quranism. These are Quranists who seek to explain the Quran via archaeological research. For example, they have found Petra, the city of Petra, in Jordan, and they use this to say, well, that is the place of Hajj. So there is a certain method being employed there. Sufistic Quranists, as Yasin said earlier, these are Quranists who believe that the Quran is the ultimate way of reaching ma'rifah, or gnosis, which is a state of closeness with Allah. Polemical Quranists. These are Quranists who don't use the Quran for very much else except for debates between traditionalists and themselves. So the Quran kind of loses its philosophical ideas there. Racialistic Quranists. These are Quranists who tend to focus on certain color terms used in the Quran in order to implicate upon the origins of man. Atheistic Quranists. There are actually people who believe in the Quran as a source of wisdom, but not in God. Admittedly, there are very few of us who are like this, but again, we need to respect their choices in approaching the text. Existentialist Quranists. These are Quranists who focus on the reader of the Quran. The Quran actually places great emphasis on the reader, the second person pronoun, you, in the Quran. And existentialist Quranists focus on this and try to articulate the Quran from there. I'm almost done. It's just 3 more to go, 2 more to go. Utopianist Quranists. These are Quranists who believe that the Quran should be used as a manual of discovering the human utopia. And they actually have a project where they wish to emigrate to other lands to build a Quranic society. Lingocentric Quranists. These are Quranists who rely upon linguistic resources and grammar in order to discover their truths about the Quran. And finally, fundamentalist Quranists. These are Quranists who hold fundamentalist views against other Muslims and generally other people, and they believe that they have attained salvation by adopting the Quran alone position. Quranism and the world of Islam. How can Quranists benefit the world of Islam? I think the first question we need to ask is, why start with the world of Islam? So a person who does not originate from the world of Islam may say, well, I think you're being a bit biased here, what about the rest of us? Well, the reason why I start with the world of Islam is because undeniably the Quran comes from the world of Islam. The Ahl al-Dhikr, the people who are reciting the Dhikr, they are from the world of Islam. Day and night they are reciting the Quran. And Quranists should be honest enough to admit that we obtain the Quran from these people. And obviously these people are called the Muslims. The world of Islam is besieged by something called Islamic fundamentalism. And we all know it. We've seen it. I mean, those of you who come in, you looked at Yasin, you probably thought, is he related to that guy, Anjum Chaudhry? Probably not. So, I mean, Anjum Chaudhry is all over the newspapers. Why? Because he preaches Islamic fundamentalism. It's a very emotive ideology, and that ideology brings about great readership and attention. The Islamic fundamentalism project is a comprehensive system. And I have to admit this. I mean, I've actually studied Islamic fundamentalism, and I see how comprehensive it is. Its goal is incredibly complete in what it seeks for the world. It wishes for the world a state, the Dawla Islamiyah. And that Dawla has a Sharia law which separates the believers and the non-believers. So it's not civil rights anymore. If you claim to be Muslim, you have rights, more rights than those who are non-Muslims. It's almost an apartheid-like system. So by that, it also preaches a chosen people idea. So in other words, if you're a Muslim, you belong to the Ummah. And by the way, I'm not against the concept of Ummah. I believe the Ummah exists, but it's a cultural entity. There are good and bad people in the Ummah. You don't become part of the Ummah and suddenly become chosen. So that's not how we think at all. And lastly, Islamic fundamentalism think they have the exclusive rights to truth. You hear this. They say, well, you don't believe me? You're not Muslim. You've heard that before, I'm sure. I mean, everyone who has encountered these people would have heard such a very radical ideology. Quranism and the counter-fundamentalist initiative. The first thing we need to realize is that we are not the only ones against fundamentalism. Many, I would say, there is even a silent majority of Muslims who are against this. I mean, these people can be liberals or secularists, cultural activists, Democrats. They are Muslims, but they are also against fundamentalism. And the key to this is to work together, think beyond religious differences. The liberal and you may have a different way of interpreting the Quran, but it doesn't matter because we have the same problem, and that problem is fundamentalist thinking. So we have to think beyond, as I said, religious differences and focus on commonalities in social needs. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody wants their society to be filled with atrocities and explosions, obviously. You know, we would like to live a peaceful life, and we can't do that with a rather fundamentalist ideology in our midst. So Quranists can help this counter-fundamentalist initiative by providing a comprehensive critique of Hadith and Sharia. And that's one thing we do very well, I must say. I think because of our focus on the Quran, we have seen why Hadith and Sharia law has its shortcomings. But this does not mean that Hadith cannot be a source of wisdom and Sharia law cannot be a source of a cultural law for Muslims. However, Hadith and Sharia must be tempered to be within a Quranic parameter. We can provide a means of articulating Islam which is more Quran-centered. Now, how do we do this? For example, Sharia law at present is filled with laws which we find to be contrary to our reason and obviously with the Quran. So we need to ask ourselves, how does the Quran replace that? What does the Quran talk about instead of laws? Instead, I was actually asked by a friend who's not a Quranist but a Muslim. He asked me, why is it the Quran only has like maybe 5% laws and the rest of it stories and parables? This is an excellent question. I mean, this is not an accident. Obviously, Allah authored the Quran in a certain way so that we can focus on its contents. And the fact is the Quran is not legal-centered. And these are things which we need to alert our friends who are against fundamentalism. And lastly, Quranists can provide an impetus for a more dynamic discussion about the Quran. As I said before, we sit down, we can free think about the Quran. We are not tied with any taqleed or blind imitation of any past ideas. We can interpret the Quran, we can actually go back to the roots of certain words, ask why these words are used here instead of there. We can, because of our focus on the Quran, we have this unique advantage, I believe. Quranism in the world, and I promise I'm almost coming to the end now. Quranism in the world. So this is Quranism and where the Quran is where it should be in the hands of humankind. Humanity at present is given only partial access to the Quran. Why is this? Go to Waterstones and you'll find out. If you go to the politics section, that's not where you'll find the Quran. You'll find books on Islamic terrorism there, but not the Quran. You go to the economic section, you won't find the Quran. Philosophy, not the Quran. You will find the Quran in a specific section in the religious bookshelf. Why? Because it's considered to be the religious heritage of Islam. Humanity think that they need to go through the entire body of Islamic literature in order to understand the Quran. So naturally the Quran has been made inaccessible to them. But the Quran is seen as a book of Islam. That is, what Islam represents is what the Quran says. So we have certain media personalities, fundamentalists, they will say all sorts of things and somebody will quote the Quran generally out of context and people think, aha, the Quran preaches world domination and subjugation of non-Muslims. This is what we see in the world, unfortunately. And in fact, this is rarely the case. I personally am working on certain projects to show that the Quran is absolved of any kind of relationship with these fundamentalist ideas. And the first point to make in that is that there is not only one kind of Islam. Yasin is going to speak about that right after this. So how can Quranists benefit humankind? Provide a freer reading of the Quran. As I said, the Quran is space for people to think, thereby allowing the Quran to be more than a religious book. In fact, I believe it's a book of divine philosophy. It should be read as a philosophical text. Questions the Quran can answer. What does it mean to be human? Philosophers have asked this. Some philosophers have said being human is to be able to control one's environment. What does the Quran say to this? Have we explored such questions? How should human beings act towards one another? The question of ethics. Without the concept of Muslim/non-Muslim, which is preached by traditional Islam, what does the Quran say about this? Again, we need to explore. What is the best social-political system to live in peace? All of us wish to live in peace. The Quran calls it salam, peace. And Islam is the acquisition of peace. What is the best social-political system to get there? Does the Quran talk about this? I believe it does. But because it is shrouded in the mask of traditional Islam, this is not something we can easily see. So in summary, thank God we're finally there. Quranist Islam is a type of Islam. It is not another religion. It focuses on the Quran as a sole authority in religion, rather than associating that authority with other authorities such as hadith or the ulama. Quranism is a free space where people are encouraged to think freely. When you come through our doors, your views are for us to appreciate and evaluate and use if we find it useful. There are at present 21 types of approaches to Quranist Muslims. So that shows our diversity. We have no problem at all with diversity. Quranism can benefit the world of Islam and humankind in general if we give it the chance. Thank you very much indeed.